With today's stabbing at a mosque in London with the headline Mosque Knifing Terror. The Guardian's main story is about Airbnbs taking over cities and towns, leaving some communities short of housing for people. It also has a photograph of the vigil for attack victims in Germany. The Daily Mirror has the headline Dame Julie, My Cancer Ordeal, in relation to Julie Walters' battle with colon cancer. The Financial Times reporting that the American bank Morgan Stanley has acquired the online trading platform E-Trade. So Sonia and Sebastian are here. More people obviously still coming in. But you want to start with the Metro and what happened at this mosque today.
So, a really sad story. We're not very clear, actually, on all the details yet, I think it's important to say, because it happened kind of so recently. What it appears happened was a man at a mosque, the London Central Mosque. He tried to attack the imam. Instead, he ended up attacking another man and kind of seriously wounded him. Apparently his injuries aren't life-threatening, but they are very serious. He's been rushed to hospital. And obviously this is happening in a climate where people are worried about terrorism. We've just seen the dreadful attack that's happened in Germany. We think that that was far-right terrorism. It's too early to know exactly what this is yet. And in fact, some sources have suggested that the man responsible for this may himself have been Muslim, an Albanian or Bosnian Muslim. It's not quite clear.
And they have attended the mosque as well.
They may have attended the mosque. Some people at the mosque say they may have seen him before. Apparently there may have been mental health issues involved. So it's not yet clear exactly what this is. But obviously Muslims, this happens in a place of worship. People at their sort of daily prayers. And the sort of climate in which it's happening, I think, will make Muslims feel very kind of worried about these sorts of attacks, and particularly after, some of the attacks we've seen, from Finsbury Park, for example, a couple of years ago. This definitely kind of doesn't help that thing.
It is still amazing that everything gets filmed, so you have photographs of all of it, don't you? The Daily Telegraph too saying that Muslims are asking for more security in the light of what happened.
Yes, we're just picking up on what Sonia said there. There's some reporting in the Telegraph's front page with Whitehall sources saying that mental health issues were likely to be a factor in this compared to the German terror attack, which was very much a far-right neo-Nazi attack that happened yesterday evening. But this is something that I know the Muslim community in Britain has asked for quite a long time here, because we know the security services are consistently picking up on these far-right plots, and it's very difficult to stop the lone wolf. And this is the thing that worries the Met, worries MI5 so much, because tracking one terrorist often takes 12 people to do that. And when they look at all the hundreds of plots they're consistently trying to foil and people they're trying to track, they just don't have the manpower to absolutely do everything. If you remember me back to the Westminster Bridge attack, which has a lot of similarities, the talk of mental health issues, someone who was a Muslim themselves and someone who was acting as a lone wolf, the challenge with that was, it's always, can the security services have done more? The answer is, well, probably not, in fact. But I think this idea that mosques need better protection is one that probably will pick up currency here. But it's, I feel very sorry, because it's, such a sacred place for people worshipping there. It's one of the worst possible things you could absolutely imagine. So I think the Muslim community in London will be very much on edge at this evening, combined with what happened in Germany as well. Just, it does remind us this threat is absolutely constant. They can't all be stopped all the time, and it's just a fact of life, sadly.
Yes. Let's go back to the main page on the Daily Telegraph, because that shows the vigil, doesn't it, for the victims of the attack in Germany. Angela Merkel certainly talks about the threat of racism that exists in Germany, a real fear, possibly, about Germany stepping again towards the far right with the history. And obviously, that was the country that took the most Syrian and Iraqi refugees, didn't it, a few years ago, which, some communities perhaps possibly suggesting that they are feeling overwhelmed by the numbers.
Germany has such a confused picture on this whole thing, because you've got, as you said, the infamous million migrants that were taken in. I think in the longer history trends that Merkel will be treated well from that, but the immediate integration of those into German society and community has undoubtedly caused problems. And I think one thing you see as part of that is the rise of the AfD, which is a far-right party. It's the first far-right party to have political representation in Germany in 7 decades, and the fact that they've risen so quickly and rapidly in local state elections, but also in the Bundestag as well, does show that Germany does have some big societal issues there. And I think this kind of attack very much does speak to that.
I think it is important to keep it in perspective, though, when you look at the number of refugees that European countries have taken over the last few years from, conflict zones like Iraq and Syria. It's actually a tiny proportion of refugees that states around Iraq and Syria, states like Turkey, for example, have taken in Lebanon. And actually, when you look at how big our populations are, again, it's kind of a very, very small number. Obviously, sometimes it can be visible if people are all being housed in one place. So I would be kind of cautious about, I think we really have to keep it in perspective. And if anything, I think we should be doing more, not less. And there are certainly countries that have taken even more than Germany within Europe and haven't suffered from these problems. I think also, picking up on what Seb said about the changing nature of terrorism, I think that is quite important to note as well. So the days of very sort of large-scale orchestrated attacks that involve, lots of cells, the sorts of attacks inspired by a terrorist organisation like Al-Qaeda, they seem to have moved on, and an organisation like ISIS seems to rely much more on inspiring single actors, where actually there won't be lots of communication about it. It will be literally
propaganda
people watching
online,
propaganda and being inspired by it to act, and acting alone, which again makes it much more difficult for the police to track these things, because often the way they sort of manage to thwart these plots is by coming across intelligence, as well as having individuals under surveillance.
Yes.
So I think that's one of the things that is making it more, not less difficult.
Yeah.
Indeed, and they sort of have to try and go to the heart of it in terms of the ideology and the indoctrination that creates this path that people go down to lead them to do these horrific acts here. And again, that's a much longer term thing. I think that does worry the police and security services.
Yeah, and the pressures in countries like Syria continue. Our coverage
Absolutely.
today from Idlib, people are moving towards a closed Turkish border. It's very, depressing and devastating for so many people. Let's go to the Times, shall we? A kind of related story. Home Office is racist, says this report into the so-called Windrush generation. We haven't yet got that report, though, have we?
So this is quite extraordinary, leaked from the inquiry here. So if we recall, the whole Windrush scandal happened in 2018, and it really began when it revealed that children of the Windrush generation who came to the UK in the 50s were being deported unjustly due to basically a big institutional mess up by the Home Office, which was completely lost track of paperwork. And the question was, what was behind this? Was it a policy failure? Was it a pragmatic operational failure? And this report, which was done by Wendy Williams, which is said to be independent, and we will discuss, I'm not sure where that sits within Whitehall, but it's definitely independent of politicians, has looked into this. And what it has concluded is that the Home Office was institutionally racist over that hostile environment policy towards migrants. The hostile environment was put forward by Theresa May when she was Home Secretary to try and limit illegal migration, but too often its effects spilled over into legal migration, and that very much fell into the Windrush thing. What's interesting in this, to put in the context of the Home Office is going through a very rough patch. If we think, 10 years ago when John Reid was Home Secretary and said the whole thing is not fit for purpose, it needs to be shut down. We're almost back to that, where you've got the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, in a public slanging match with her permanent secretary, Sir Philip Ruttman. You've got this report here, and we shouldn't forget the Home Office is at the centre of the future of this country. At the end of this year, it's got to produce this whole new migration system, border checks, customs checks, security checks when we leave the EU. And so far, it's one of those things, everything seems to be going wrong for it. So if I was Boris Johnson reading this kind of report, it would really make me incredibly worried.
But I think we shouldn't forget that actually the hostile environment was very much a political policy. So it wasn't just a matter of implementation. It was something very close to Theresa May that she really pushed. And it's not a surprise to me that the original version of this report, it's now said to have been watered down, but it's not a surprise that the original version of the report concluded that the Home Office is institutionally racist. Because if you look at the definition of institutional racism under the Macpherson inquiry, which looked into the Met and Stephen Lawrence's death, what it said was that an organisation is institutionally racist if people of different races or ethnicities get treated differently by processes, by the system. There's absolutely no question that the Windrush policy, the government's Windrush policy, it saw people who've lived in Britain all their lives, legally, paid taxes, refused care from the NHS, deported illegally sometimes, so really, really problematic. And a couple of years ago, people appealed another of the Home Office's hostile environment policies called called Right to Rent, which is about landlords being asked to do checks on people who come to rent homes from them. And the High Court found that that policy was racially discriminatory, because what it ended up in was landlords, if you've got, if your skin's a different colour, or if you've got a different sounding name, landlords asking you for documentation to prove that you've got the right to live in the UK, that they wouldn't ask somebody who looks European, say. So it's, this report would not be the first report to say that the government's hostile environment policy is institutionally racist. The court.
I need to move on, Sebastian. And just very quickly, the Telegraph as well. Let's just show you the Priti Patel story, which is on the front there. I was just going to say she's obviously survived the recent reshuffle, so she's there to stay, isn't she?
Yes. Oh,
Not great policies.
no,
anyway.
Indeed.
Yes, you just...
I was going to say just very quickly that I think you do have to have this line, because the hostile environment was not meant to target people who should be here. The Windrush generation were unfairly targeted.
Policy, the right to rent policy did, and that's what the High Court found.
Sure, I was
incredibly important, really.
We won't have long on the way back. Okay, Priti Patel, very quickly.
Patel, very quickly. The Home Secretary is being a big row with her senior civil servants. People are very annoyed. People are leaking lots of comments, briefing against each other. This one will not end well.
Okay, interesting. Right. So, do you live in one of those areas where a quarter of all properties are listed on Airbnb? Find out next. Soda and Sebastian Payne, welcome back to both of you. Labour leadership, obviously, still ongoing. Tony Blair has waded in and said what?
Well, he's celebrating the 120th anniversary of the Labour Party being founded, and is saying in that 120th there's only been two leaders born who won elections. One is Howard Wilson, who's long passed away, and the other is Tony Blair. But what was actually interesting from the former PM was that he did have the self-awareness to say, look, people probably don't want to hear from me, but I'm going to make my piece anyway. And I thought there was one quote that he said that's worth listening to, which is, where he said, Labour's aim is not to trend on Twitter or to have celebrities temporarily, by the way, fawn over it. Our task is to win power, to get our hands stuck in the muddy wrangle of governing where we can be pulled up in the prize of progress. I thought that was such a good line. And people will say, oh, it's Blair, Iraq, he's awful, dreadful, he's basically a Tory. The fact is, he did win 3 elections. Labour is so far away from winning where he was when he was leader. They should listen to him, and I'm very much of the view Labour will not come anywhere near winning an election till it learns to love Tony Blair again.
Interesting. I think he definitely deserves to be listened to. He won 3 elections, as Seb has just said. Moving on to... Should we move on to the next, just because...
For time, which is the areas in Britain with 1 Airbnb for every 4 homes in The Guardian. This is an extraordinary figure, isn't it?
Absolutely. So it's exclusive from my Guardian colleagues. So some areas of the country, it's 1 in 4, 1 in 5 homes in the area are being listed on Airbnb. And I think there'll be a lot of people, it's a lot of areas where there are second homes, etc. There are a lot of people who'll be quite concerned about this, because obviously if you've got a high number of short-term lets, that dries up rents. It makes it harder for people who live locally to get an affordable rent on their house. And, Airbnb, I think, look, for lots of us, it's a brilliant convenience. It's great being able to rent a nice flat or home with your friends, wherever you're going on holiday. But it does have a real impact, I think, on local housing markets. And Barcelona, as a city, have been incredibly concerned about this. They sought to ban Airbnb because of the number of short-term lets driving up rents for local people.
So
I think this is a...
Yes, or just some places that we teased, didn't we? So Edinburgh Old Town.
Yep, so 29% of homes in Edinburgh Old Town are listed on Airbnb, 25% in Northwest Skye, and in England we've got areas, so there are some areas in Devon where it's 1 in 4, in the Lake District, so all of these kind of holiday hotspots that you might expect, but it's pricing out local.
We should just to look at the other context of it as well, because in places like Edinburgh Old Town, that is an acute spot that's known to be very bad. There is the point as well, you've got to put it, when you have houses that don't necessarily affect the local housing stock, I think city centres are a big problem for Airbnb, but
I need to get to the weather, because it's grim, as you know, and there's Anyway, we will see you at 11:30 for more. Thank you very much indeed. Let's check out the weather. You want to reflect on what happened in this mosque, first of all, front page of the Metro and elsewhere in the papers.
So, really terrible incident happened earlier today. A man pulled out a knife during worship in a mosque. It was a mosque in London, the London Central Mosque. Apparently, he tried to sort of attack. He was going for the imam. Instead, he attacked another man in the mosque. Apparently, he was seriously injured. He was rushed to hospital. His injuries aren't life-threatening, though. And I think this will really be making Muslims, I suppose, in London feel quite on edge. It's a sort of time of heightened awareness of terrorist attacks. We saw the attack in Finsbury Park on the mosque there a couple of years ago, and it's come in the context of last night's attacks by a neo-Nazi terrorist, far-right terrorist, a man who went and shot a number of Muslims in a German city. So initially there was a lot of questions about whether this was an act of far-right terrorism that might have been inspired by what happened in Germany. It's very early, though. We don't have a complete set of information, I think it's important to say. Sources have reported that the man, the attacker, may himself be Muslim.
Alleged attacker, of course.
The alleged attacker, of course, thanks, you're right to correct me, but the alleged attacker may himself been a Muslim from Albania or Bosnia. Apparently mental health issues may have been at play. So it's not clear exactly what sort of attack this is. I think we'll get more information in the coming days, but I think thoughts must be with the country's Muslim community, who will clearly be feeling very kind of under siege in the wake of an attack like this.
But it's difficult, isn't it, with allegations like this and with criminal proceedings when everything is filmed these days, that you get photographs on the front cover. It's not there, but it was on the other one, of identification issues, isn't it? It's the world in which we live, isn't it?
It is difficult for identification, but I actually think it's very important for exposing the realities of what these attacks are like, and it shows people, that people were praying in a holy place when this attack took place today, and people, the fact we can see that and see what the Muslim community in London is having to deal with is a really important thing, actually. But this story is quite different to what happened in Germany, which is also featured on some of the other front pages, which suffered a far-right terror attack yesterday with several people killed there. And I think what they're saying this is more like is someone suffering from mental health issues, which reflects some of the lone wolf terror attacks that we saw during last year. And I think the challenge very much for the security services is, how do you track the lone wolf terrorists? Because they're online, they're targeted by ISIS, by these groups, they're indoctrinated, they follow that idea, and it's very, very hard to track them all individually across very different places. So the police moved very quickly here. So, there is someone who's someone's not fatally injured, but is very deeply injured. So hopefully, the security service can do their best, but ultimately they're not going to be able to stop all of these all the time.
Yes, there's the Telegraph. Muslims ask for more security after London's mosque stabbing. If we go to the front page of the Telegraph, which we saw there too, that was the vigil, wasn't it, for the attack in Germany, which is obviously still being investigated as well. But certainly the German Chancellor Angela Merkel talking about the spectre of racism in Germany, which is very worrying. Let's move on to the Home Office, shall we? Priti Patel, The Times tells us, has bullied civil servants for years. What is going on at the Home Office?
So this is a big row between the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, who's pictured on the left there, and her chief civil servant, a man called Sir Philip Ruttman. And in the civil service, the permanent secretaries who run the department are always there. They don't change depending who isn't in office. And there was an explosive report in the Times yesterday that said that Ms. Patel had this big standing row, and there were sources saying that she wanted to break the law and Sir Philip Ruttman didn't want to break the law. There was allegations of bullying. There was also suggestions that some senior Home Office staff had been taken ill after being pushed to work very hard by Ms. Patel. There was a push back against that as well, saying that basically Sir Philip Ruttman wasn't filling his role. So there's this big spat between the political side of the Home Office and Ms. Patel, and the civil service side in Sir Philip Ruttman.
And I think damagingly for Priti Patel, now Priti Patel has had quite a checkered political career, shall we say. So she was sacked from Theresa May's government for lying to Theresa May. She took a holiday in Israel, met with the Benjamin Netanyahu there, the Prime Minister, didn't notify the Foreign Office and lied to Theresa May about it. So she left Theresa May's government under a real cloud. Boris Johnson brought her back, put her in a really prominent role of Home Secretary. But it's important to say that these aren't the only bullying allegations allegations that have surfaced. The Times has got a really thorough write-up here, and they've done quite a bit of digging, and it turns out that there were sort of allegations about her conduct at DFID, the Department for International Development, and before that, when she was a minister at the Department for Work and Pensions. So, these are allegations. You've got the Senior Civil Servants Union saying, because the government, people in the government have said, well, no official complaints have been putting in, and actually the Senior Civil Servants Union has said there isn't a proper process for very senior civil servants to sort of put in official complaints about bullying against ministers, and it's not good enough. It's important to say they are allegations, but it's the kind of volume of allegations. It's not just from one department, it's from 3 departments that she's worked in. So it's not looking, particularly great, I think.
But I do think this is nothing new. This happened a lot under the last government, that if you looked, David Cameron was very unhappy with a man called Lord Kerslake, who was head of the Home Civil Service, and got him pushed out. Francis Maude was very unhappy with the permanent secretary at the Cabinet Office. They were pushed out. Helen Ghosh, who was at the Home Office under Theresa May, she was pushed out as well.
This goes a bit further than sort of pushing out civil servants. So there are real sort of allegations.
Let's finish his points.
There are real allegations of bullying. It's sort of quite terrible.
But the point I want to say is that the relationship between politicians and civil servants is a long and checkered thing. And the fact is, Priti Patel has an agenda she wants to put forward at the Home Office, is no doubt pushing it in a very firm way. This is a big part of the Johnson government's agenda, to be tough on law and order. We'll see if these bullying allegations go anywhere. There's so many of them that you think there's going to have to be some kind of investigation. But I do think there is absolutely no danger at this stage of Priti Patel anywhere. She is so central to the Boris Johnson government and how they view crime and security and borders and that sort of thing. I think what's far more likely is that Sir Philip Rutman will get moved on as permanent secretary.
The post-Brexit world relies a lot on the Home Office, does it not? If you think about the immigration point system yesterday, the borders that you've mentioned as well.
Yeah, the government is planning a huge shift in immigration policy that has been trailed in all the papers this week. And the last time we saw a big change in the immigration system, it took 4 years to implement. Now with Brexit and a post-Brexit world, the government wants to push through a radically different immigration policy in a period of just months. And the Home Office has always been considered, a department that's sort of quite it doesn't work that well from the inside. It's a huge department, very sprawling. So it's going to be a major challenge, I think.
Okay, we've got lots more to pack in. I'm already running over. So why Michael Bloomberg might wish he hadn't turned up to his first presidential debate as a Democrat, that after the break. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me, Sonia Soda and Sebastian Payne. Welcome back to both of you. Let's future-proof ourselves, shall we? Great fear about AI, artificial intelligence, but the FT suggesting that it's made a medical leap because of AI.
Yeah, and this is a rare good news story, and don't we like to see some of those on the front pages? So, in the world, we're really developing antibiotic resistance. It's a major threat to humanity because we're talking about maybe in 50 or 60 years antibiotics not working because bacteria evolved to become resistant to them, which would make even doing very simple operations, for example, potentially life-threatening. So it's quite scary when you start to look at this. And one of the reasons is we've not had any new classes of antibiotics developed for a very long time. There's only been 2 new classes of antibiotic developed since the 1960s, so it's not very profitable for drug companies. But this story is actually about a new class of antibiotic being developed, which is really great news for people who are interested in fighting antibiotic resistance. And it's been done using artificial intelligence. So what researchers have done is they've developed thousands of molecules and then run their sort of potential for sort of attacking bacteria through a big computer is about as technical as I'm going to get through this, but it's led to discover new types of antibiotics. So it's a hugely good news story. It shows how AI, artificial intelligence, which is often something we talk about as a threat to human jobs, actually delivering something quite new and exciting, and it could be a really important tool in the fight against antibiotic
Yeah, well, that's
resistance.
artificial intelligence. You wanted to talk about a super genius, intelligent human being, didn't you? Which is the inventor of copy and paste, but you tell me lots of other things as well, which is in the mail.
Yes, so this is Larry Tesler, who was a computer scientist, one of the most renowned computer scientists of the 20th century, who sadly passed away on Monday. And he's responsible for nearly everything that you understand and know about a computer now. That when he worked at Xerox's research facility in Silicon Valley in the 1960s and 70s, he was part of the team that created the mouse, the laser printer, cut, copy and paste, replaced many different things. And what was extraordinary about Dr. Tesla was the way that he looked at how computers operated through a text-based system and how to simplify the whole thing through. And there's a very famous meeting that in 1980, Steve Jobs, who was CEO of Apple at that point, went to visit Xerox PARC, and Larry Tesler demonstrated this amazing technology, including the mouse, including the graphical user interface, and Steve Jobs couldn't believe it, and he was jumping up and down, saying, this stuff is amazing, why aren't you guys selling this stuff? And of course, the researchers, the doctor here, couldn't sell it to Xerox HQ, so Steve Jobs then literally stole the whole technology for the first Macintosh, and then many years later, he stole Larry Tesler, who then worked at Apple as a chief scientist for several decades. So every time you use a computer and you think about any of those functions, it's all because of him. That is a real genius.
Okay, and a quick word on Michael Bloomberg, who entered the fray last night, the first debate that he appeared in. How did it go?
So not very well for Bloomberg, the consensus is. And there were sort of two problems. So first of all, there's a lot of stuff circulating about Bloomberg, comments he's alleged to have made about women, fat broads and horse-faced lesbians in his past. His record as mayor of New York, he really increased the use of stop and frisk policies that have disproportionately targeted
Standing
black
as a
Americans.
Republican never helps in a Democratic
Standing as a
debate.
Republican never helps. He's a really controversial candidate. He's played this late, so he's decided to stay out of the race for a little bit and then chuck a load of money at it. He's spending huge sums on adverts, but he wasn't able to deal with those things that were being thrown at him by candidates like Elizabeth Warren last
This
night.
is the problem if you enter the race late, isn't it? You're not
it
as
was
warmed up.
not a good night for him.
We have run out of time. Sebastian and Sonia, thank you both very much indeed. Top stories, of course, are next.